Welcome back to the Nullified Take, where we've got the TNT takes for you on Australian Survivor, Blood versus Water, Week 4, and we are joined, myself and Jake, the USA correspondent here, waking up at 1 a.m. in the morning to do this podcast. We're joined by some previous Survivor royalty, Wei Chim, on the channel, our first international Survivor to ever be on the channel. Wei, it's so great to talk to you again. How have you been?
I've been really well, Chris. It is so amazing to be back. Thank you for welcoming me back. It's really great. I'm really enjoying watching the season. I'm really excited to recap because I do have to say it's been really relaxing sort of watching it without watching me or my friends on it. This is just, like people and stuff, and just watching it with a new lens and really looking forward to breaking it down. And again, congrats on the new channel and everything like that. You guys have had some amazing content and I'm just thrilled to be a part of it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And also for those viewers that are watching this at a later stage, I just want to thank you for getting us to 200 subscribers. We do have a little bit of a competition coming up for when we hit 500 subscribers. We're actually going to make a Australian Survivor Brains versus Brawn merge buff available as a part of a competition when we hit that. And the reason that I'm targeting 500 subs is because when we get there, we can start doing community posts, we can start putting polls out there, and then I can get you guys involved in how we actually continue to grow this channel. So thank you so much, Wei, for that. And we're so happy to have you here. And you mentioned that, you're really enjoying this, and it's kind of like therapeutic to watch this and not actually have to worry about what your friends said behind your back when you look at the show out there. What have you thought of the season as a whole so far, and who's some of the favorite characters that you've got out there that are still playing the game or who may have left already?
No, definitely. It is very much a different experience watching it this time, especially having played. You just do watch it with different lenses, and even watching the US season that just passed, I wasn't expecting how much I would be like, oh, I'm really empathetic to how difficult things are, and you're making decisions in these kind of unusual circumstances, which I never really thought of before. It's so easy on the couch going, they should have done this, but now you're like, actually, I kind of know why they might not have. You're not in your best thing, but really enjoying the season. I think the extra element of the blood versus water and playing with your loved one is a really, really interesting twist. And it's playing out really well, I think, for this particular cast. I'm loving the dynamics, the real betrayals and the conversations that are being had with the pairs. Lost a couple of early pairs. I was really sad to see, I think, Kate go. I thought she was such a lovely player and had potential to go well. But excited with a lot of the people that are still here. I think some of my favorites, definitely Khan. What an amazing guy, just a really lovely person who's really, and playing really hard. And I think, and I'm just really enjoying the season and seeing some of our favorites come back, like Sam and Mark doing really, really well as well. So it's been a really great, I'm loving this twist and this theme, definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring Khan up. I knew me and you, we're just in sync. I mean, we think alike. I'm a massive Khan fan. Khan and Chrissy, they're my two people this season, just like I was George last season all the time. Now I've got two. I can't decide between them. But Jenny here mentions, love you, Wei, was rooting for you on Brains versus Brawn. I cried when you won immunity. Such a great moment. And then Marcus also in the stream saying, brought me to tears as well, of course. Whaley, you and Haley, Team Whaley. So you've got some supporters here already in the live stream, and it's quite interesting because when we look at this season, I've been a bit frustrated this season again with the edit, as per usual. We as super fans sometimes get a little bit frustrated when certain people don't get a lot of screen time or no screen time. And I know that at certain times, even when you were on the show, your edit kind of went a little bit missing at times. How's it been watching it now? Sort of, you mentioned that that there's more going on than what we probably see as viewers when we watch the show. And I feel like even for me as a podcaster, when I started podcasting about a year ago, I started looking at, even though I've never played and I can't pretend to know what it would be like to be out there, but I've got a little bit more appreciation that, listen, don't be so critical on Ben for betraying Croc. Maybe there's more there. We're missing context. Who are some of the players that you feel like, at the moment, we're just not seeing enough of them, and maybe they're playing this great game, but we're just not aware because the show's not doing them justice at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the edit because I do think that watching it back now, having had the experience of the edit last year and recognizing what's going on, I am watching it with that extra layer, and I'm sure you've noticed this as you've been doing this podcast content. Specifically, I think the elephant in the room is that Mish and Mel haven't had confessionals. I think Mel has had 0 confessionals and made merge. However, I now knowing that they've made merge and also having had the experience of what happened to me, I do kind of trust the editors a little bit. I know this is an unpopular opinion, but while everyone was kind of noticing that I wasn't really in the show, I knew where I ended up and I knew what was coming. I knew that immunity challenge was coming. I knew I was going to win and where my arc would come. And this also comes from me as a storyteller. So I'm curious with Mel and Mish, especially, that their story might be that them playing together as twins, specifically as a component. So the fact that they've been more silenced early on might make sense from a story sense. I'm being optimistic here, but yeah, recognize that you can't show everything in the screen because there's just too much content going on. There's just too many things happening, and you have to tell the story and focus. And a lot of the focus is on earlier boots. You know, the first episode was all about Andy, and we lost him straight away. So I think there is definitely lots of layers of things happening that we don't get to see. We are just seeing the story that is being presented to us, and there are lots and lots of layers. And if you read the Instagrams and stuff like that, Ben said, "Oh, I didn't think Croc could get the votes," and if you tally it up, that's probably true. I mean, Chrissy couldn't even vote for Jesse. So there's layers there, and they're definitely telling a story, and we have to take it at face value, but also recognizing, hey, something's happening there. So I'm trying to watch it. It's really interesting watching it with that extra layer, but it doesn't change the fact that I still don't know what's underneath because I wasn't there, and none of us were.
No, definitely. And the reason that I asked this, I want to bring up our points for this season. So we, out of 30, so the points that myself and Jake could have given players out of 30, these are the players that we have sort of handpicked so far as the top players. And when you look at this, Mark has got a 25 out of 30 potential points. Nina, I believe, sat at about 16 points out of 30 points. And then a lot of the others are a little bit lower. But if you look at these people in here, you would see that they're also the ones that actually have received the most screen time. And there are some players that we haven't seen, they haven't featured. There's only about 11 players that have really featured this season and that have gotten some points from us or who we thought played a certain level of game. Jake, coming over to you, there was definitely a lot of action. I know you're a massive Nina fan. You gave Nina the number 1 spot for last week. I think I had not in my top 5 last week at all, because I did see a little bit of problems for her after losing Sandra in the game. I thought that could hurt her social game a little bit, not having her mother there, where you went the other way. She had the bogey off her back. The 2-time champion is out now. She's a free agent. Obviously, we lose Nina here this week to injury, and I know that you're as big of a Nina fan as I am a Khan and Chrissy fan. How did you feel seeing all of this play out?
I think I may have fell for a trick from the editors. Maybe they were just giving her flowers in the last episode last week. Maybe they were giving her more credit than she was actually getting out there. But ignoring that, I thought she was a great player, and I'll always rep my Americans. Wei, you grew up in America. I hope you were rooting for them as well. And it was really sad to see how it just happened so suddenly. Like when I saw it in the previews last week, I was like, there's no way that that's actually happening. There's no way that's how it ends. I thought it was just a misdirection, but it's how it went. And that's just no worse way to go than that.
Wait, how did you feel about the whole situation with watching an American play this game? Obviously, yourself, American born, moved to Australia. And I think I had that question for you last season, which you answered and said, no, there wasn't any issues with me being an American playing the game. And I said, culturally, how does it sort of, play out on the game? I would always say the island, but obviously in the outback in this case, how did that play out for you, playing? And you said, no, that wasn't held against you or anything like that. How did you feel about seeing more Americans come over and play Australian Survivor, and especially, Sandra and Nina coming over to play this game?
I think we were really, really privileged to have Sandra and Nina play. I definitely think it's an outstanding competition. It's just especially Sandra, of course, being the reigning queen, and just having that kind of caliber player play in Australia and then show her game, how she played differently. And she admitted, I think it was really great to have her say that this was the toughest place she'd ever played, despite all of the other 4 seasons, just because of the conditions, and also recognizing some of, the differences in culture. She picked up straight away that, everyone's a lot more kumbaya and friendly in Australian Survivor compared to the States. So I think that's really good because you get that from the horse's mouth. So I'm really excited. I think they were both incredible players. Sandra, unfortunately, got taken out by that, day 16 curse. And Nina, I totally agree with you, Jake. She had so much potential. There's just so much sadness in the way she left. It obviously, it seemed like a serious injury. I think she was saying that, she's still not completely healed from it. So best decision, you always have to look after your health, and the medics are exceptionally good at that. But because then it's better that maybe she'll be able to come back, and fingers crossed, JLP said it. We're going to hold him to his word. If JLP says that will come back, she will come back. So, but it's good, I think, to mix it up a little bit. I'm really hoping that we're going to get a US versus Australian, all-star season or something like that. I know all the fans are manifesting it because it would be such a wonderful thing to see, just having an international franchise come together.
Yeah, so for me being South African originally, I'm hoping we can get the South African, Australian, and US season in there. But I think that the more likelihood is that we'll see an Australian versus USA season, especially with some of the USA now being exposed to Australian Survivor players. They had your season and some of the previous season on Paramount Plus for a limited time, but obviously that got pulled prior to the new season. And the conspiracy theorists out there, they think that it's because your season's got such high praise over there, and that it put a lot of pressure on the US show coming out. How do you feel about that, Wayne, knowing that most of the Americans that watched your season and previous seasons seem to really like Australian Survivor? There's some of them that even say they prefer it.
I definitely think there's very honored in that. And I think it's definitely a different game, and it's a different format. And I'm really thrilled that the international audience, and Jake, yourself especially, just are picking it up and appreciating it. It's just different. It's a different type of game. And especially if you're a diehard fan, it just gives you more content to consume, but it doesn't take away from what you're already watching. It's just a very completely different layer of game. I think specifically the challenges are always so much more enjoyable to watch in Australian Survivor, less so the competing part, but definitely just that extra layer, I think, really changes how you appreciate the game and stuff. So I'm really hoping they'll bring it back. It is really disappointing that they've pulled it off. I know, especially for lots of people who might have wanted to tune into Sandra and Nina playing, to see their own players playing in this season, but not being able to, is really, really disappointing. And I'm really hoping that gets solved. But those are outside of things we cannot control nor influence. Maybe influence a little.
Now, I do want to go back to Jake, aka the kid on the podcast here. He does have a little bit of an eye on Jesse, and I think you were on to Jesse as a great game player before I was, Jake. What have you thought about Jesse's gameplay throughout this season, and specifically how he maneuvered here in week 4? Because we suddenly got a lot more exposure to both Jesse and Geordie as a pair in this game this week.
Yeah, Jesse seems to be in a really good spot in his tribe at the moment. I mean, even it was kind of exposed that he was the one behind the Ben vote, and they still were just didn't really care. When Croc tried to flip it on him, Ben immediately tried to flip it on Croc. And I know he had his own reasons for that, but even when Croc was trying to convince the others, they were just kind of Jesse, really? Why? Even though it's right there, you saw it, he was clearly the one running that vote. And I could tell that I think he's got people kind of around his finger a little bit, they just think of him as the kid, as they call him. And I think they're underestimating him a bit, but he definitely has a great mind in the game.
Yeah.
Sam and Jesse definitely been running that tribe.
Now, I want to ask you a question, because the pair of Geordie and Jesse this week really impressed me, both players in their own way here this week. And I think, I kind of mentioned it in my quick updates that I do. As soon as I watch the episodes, I get on, I put a camera on, not much preparation to it, but I just give my raw thoughts on the 5 top things that stood out for me in each episode. And I spoke about Jesse and the ability for him to very early on notice who his enemy is going to be in the game, the person that he needs to take out. He thinks he's a threat, right or wrong. I didn't think that Ben was a massive strategic mastermind, but he saw him as a threat, especially physically, and potentially meeting up with Shay when it comes to the merge. And Shay in her own right, she's really good at what she does, also in the challenges. I just didn't feel like they had social capital, both of these players. So that's why I personally, as a player, wouldn't have found them to be that threatening. But the one thing for me that really impressed me about Jesse is that he had the sort of forethought to go and become really good friends with this person he wanted to betray in the game. And how difficult is that to do in a game such as this? When you're playing out there with people, you're already deprived of food. There's a lot of downtime that we don't see as viewers sometimes. To be friendly with this person and pretend to care about them and pretend to make jokes with them just so you can get them comfortable with you and you can then go and blindside them. Because I thought that's a different level of player that would be able to go through something like that, because I can't imagine it's easy when you're out there to be around someone that you ultimately want to take out. Because a lot of the times you hear in the game, oh, this person didn't speak to me the whole day, so that's how I knew that they were going to turn against me. But he seemed to go the opposite direction, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think it's a little bit, it's the conditions will change that. And I don't think it's an unusual tactic to go. Certainly on my season, you had Danny, who was definitely befriending Simon with the intention of, taking him out in a blind side. And I think it is a lot easier. First of all, it's, it is, we do genuinely care for each other in that situation, in that we have no one else. There's such a small group of people and you need to work together, because if you don't work together, you literally can't survive. So I don't think it's hard to, interact with people. I think it's actually more suspicious, if you don't interact with someone and you're deliberately avoiding them, and that sends out alarm bells. It's certainly not hard to have conversations and, kind of buddy up with someone who you might want to blindside. And I think in that way, that's really smart of him. And I think the fact that he seems like a very charismatic person, lots of social capital. I think the fact that Croc did target him was the mistake on Croc's side, because he's just so well liked, and nobody was, people easily flipped, oh, we'll vote for Croc instead. You had a couple of those kind of swing votes, like Michelle and stuff, who went for Croc rather than the Jesse plan. And I think it's just because he's a very likable person, and people don't necessarily see him as a huge threat. I think he is he's chosen his alliances well, played a very, very strong social game, but I don't think people see him as the type of typical threat, like an alpha male threat, because he is just the kid, and he's leaning into that. And he even early on said that. So I think it's a really smart thing for him to do. I don't think it's hard for him to do either. He's just a very friendly, likable guy. I think what's telling is more when you lack some of that social capital, what's driving that, and I think Sam's confessional of, and has been complaining about not having food. Those are the types of social interactions that play harder in your mind and bigger in your mind, because those types of things don't come up in your everyday situation, but really are at the top of the consideration when you're in Survivor. If somebody's whining about being hungry, and we're all hungry, that stays top of mind, and that affects your social game. And that's the hard thing to kind of overcome, rather than everyone can pretend to be nice, I think.
It's so interesting you bring that up, because it reminds me of Colby Donaldson in Heroes versus Villains, which was season 20 over in the US, where he spoke about Sugar and how she was annoying everybody around camp, and that you just don't want to be the person that's annoying at camp, or, wearing down on people's nerves, because that could be the reason why people want to vote you out. And I feel like US Survivor have moved away from that sometimes now, where they'll play with anyone as long as it fits their strategy. It doesn't matter if they like the person or they don't like them. It's more about, will they vote with me, more so than that every day at camp. But when you look at the Australian Survivor, it's a marathon. It's nearly a 50-day game, so you have to be out there a lot longer with these people, so it makes it so much harder. And definitely Ben, for me, lacked a lot of awareness. And I'm really interested, Jake. What did you think of Ben's move ultimately to go and betray Croc? Obviously, they try and vote him out the night before. He ends up not going home. He's saved by the twist, which I wasn't surprised to see after Nina got medevaced. They have to have certain amounts of players within the game, so I wouldn't be surprised if they had to make like a quick adjustment, and they were going to bring this twist in, but they brought it in a little bit quicker due to the scheduling and all that. But what did you think of Ben's move here to ultimately go against Croc, who was trying to protect him in the game?
It's tough to answer that because, in our from what we've seen, Croc was trying to protect him, but in Ben's mind, he saw, oh, maybe Croc didn't vote for me, but he didn't tell me that I was getting votes, and he could have just had the courtesy to at least let me know, and that is probably really hard to know that like someone you were really close with, maybe they didn't vote for you, but they didn't even let you know. So I think maybe it was holding a bit of a grudge against him. And then once he just took the opportunity, as soon as he saw it, to flip it on him, he knew that Jesse had the power. So if Jesse found out that, Croc's trying to flip it on him, he knows that they could easily reverse it on Croc and flip it on him. So I don't know. Ben was kind of drawing dead in that tribe anyways. I mean, hell, he already got voted out once. So I think he was just trying to do something. And I don't think he had a lot of faith in Croc's plan to get out Jesse anyways. He probably was like, oh, Jesse's got he's at the top. I don't know if he can really get the numbers. So I don't really have a lot of problems with it because he just took the opportunity as soon as he saw it. And he was probably holding a bit of a grudge against Croc, which is understandable.
Mm. It's interesting because, he had an idol in his pocket before he was sent home. And I'm wondering if he let Ben in on the fact that he had an idol and that he was willing to play it for Ben to save him so that they could blindside Khan, if that could have potentially had a different outcome to it. Because we did see that early in the season that Croc and Ben and also Jordan seemed to be very close. And even when the tribes get back together and Croc is seen as the person voted out, Jordan probably has the biggest reaction from that tribe about that. So it shows that he really, was close to Croc in the game. And that's why, in Croc's defense, I think Croc made the right decision. He just didn't have the social capital to pull it off, because he correctly noticed that Jesse and Sam were a force to be reckoned with in this game. And he, like he mentioned to Chrissy, he didn't want to be a C player or a passenger in that alliance. He wanted to take control of his own fate going into the merge. So I would never criticize a player for going big and then going home because you want to control your own fate in the game. I think it's still, you'd rather play to win than not have any control in the game. But I guess it sort of moves away from what I was going to originally ask, around the idol. Do you think it would have made a difference if he potentially played a little bit more open cards with Ben? Or do you think that just due to Croc's affiliation with Chrissy, who he seemed to be more annoyed at, just would have made that very difficult in a season such as Blood versus Water?
Yeah, it was interesting because until Croc kind of did his confessional after he voted out, I don't think he even considered certainly not in the edit. It came that the idol was a consideration for him. And certainly, yeah, the more typical way of saving an alliance member is to play an idol for them, and that would keep them afloat. And it didn't seem like that was something it seemed like he must have considered it, but thought that he would rather keep it for him and Chrissy to get to merge. And I think that's always the thing of how long can you hold on to that idol, and you do kind of want to selfishly guard it. So I think I don't think that it really entered his head. And even as much as he values, as much as we say, Croc was looking after Ben and everything, I do think that friendship or that alliance may not have been as strong as, might be led out to be. I mean, certainly, yes, he's definitely trying to make moves to save him and, turn the vote on Jesse. And I think strategically, he definitely made a lot of great points, but his argument and the way he presented it just seemed to fall flat. It just didn't seem to resonate with the tribe members the way, he presented it as a strategic argument and saying this is obviously the logical choice. I felt Ben did something similar when he was trying to get Khan to play his idol, that you have no choice, when actually people aren't always swayed by those types of considerations. So I think that was a little bit of his downfall. I definitely think it would have made so much more difference and would have been a much easier and clearer objective if he had used his idol, but I think he felt that it wasn't either. either his relationship with Ben wasn't strong enough that he was willing to sacrifice his idol for that, or he just felt that he did have enough social sway to convince those guys to flip the vote on Jesse, which was a bit of a misread.
And Jill brings up an interesting point here where he says, I just hope people don't vote. I think what he means, doesn't vote for him in the final two because of his young age. And he's referring to Jesse, and he's saying like Xander didn't get votes in the last season because he was younger. Do you think that that's something that's going to count against him? Because we do see a few tribe members commenting about the fact that he's a 21-year-old trying to tell people in their 30s what to do, and they don't take too well to that. I think KJ said, I'm 37 and I'm taking orders from a 21-year-old, and she wasn't too happy about that. Do you think that's something that could be held against someone like Jesse, even if he plays a great game and gets to the end?
I don't think so. I don't think that that's going to be what comes up. And, if you get to final two, but that's, in my experience of sitting there in that jury, you do kind of weigh up the game, but it does come down to the individual. I think being young affects his personality. I mean, I remember myself as 22-year-old. I definitely didn't know things that I know now. So that just comes out not so much because of age, but just because of who he might be. But I think he seems like a very socially aware person. He's owning a lot of his kidness, and leaning into it. And that's gaining him social capital because of his self-awareness. So I don't think in any way that Jesse would have that kind of effect. And I think I have thoughts on Xander specifically. I think from what people were saying, he didn't have that same level of social awareness, and there were so many comments of him coming out fake and everything like that. So I think that actually is more the issue rather than just the flat age.
Yeah, it's a very valuable observation there, and I think a lot of people are still debating the end there with Xander. It's always going to happen in Survivor. You're not always going to like the person who wins, and you're always going to have your favorites. My heart was broken the first time Colby lost in season 2, and from there onwards, I've gotten used to my favorites not winning every season. It's just part of Survivor. And he also says here, Ben's move against Croc reminded him of Haley throwing George under the bus in the previous season. I'm not too sure how that correlates, but it is interesting. I was going to ask you, who do you think is playing the closest game to Haley from your observations so far this season? Because I do feel like Chrissy and even the editors are trying to make comparisons between Chrissy and Cara at times, with her getting confused before votes and things like that. Do you think there's anybody in your mind that you would give such high praise to say that that person looks like they're playing a similar type of game like Haley would have?
And it's interesting because I've been thinking about this a little bit, and it's more about my observation of the edit. And I'm also curious because I've seen you guys have given so many points. I think Mark is actually the one that's kind of getting that Haley edit, specifically because he's very under the radar just in terms of the strategy piece. He's doing so much to carry his tribes, no doubt. But I think the fact that he's gotten so much amazing content and screen time when he hasn't actually made many, many big moves is, managing a threat level. And I think for Haley specifically, that was her entire point, how she went through the entire game was just to manage her threat level and try and disappear until she made a big move. So I think out of anyone's kind of games or something like that, I think Mark's the one to watch and is kind of very aware of what's going on and how he is perceived amongst his tribe. And I think that's playing out in the edit especially. So I'm very keen to see where that goes.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. I brought up, for those that are listening to the audio version of this, and you can always check it out on YouTube as well under the Nullified Take. We've got a little graph here on Excel that I started putting together. Mark has received 25 out of 30 possible points for the first 3 weeks between myself and Jake. I do have some criticisms of Mark's game this week, and we'll get into that. I think that Mark is very much still up there as one of the favorites, because I just find it so interesting that they always show, well, Mark's got a close relationship with Mel and with KJ, so Mark is the ultimate decision. When Alex wants to go home, what does Mark want to do? Mark, is it okay for us to vote against Alex? There's constantly this check-in with Mark at all times. So it does make you think that we're watching Mark's story at this point with a lot of other side characters on the show. But I think that what makes it really interesting for me is that Sam has also been getting a very strong edit. Now, I don't know which one of them are going to be the winner. I think it's one of those two personally at this stage. And it could just be that the other person is getting a strong edit because they are attached to the winner and therefore their stories are intertwined. What I find interesting this week is that Jake, Mark finds an idol, he finds a clue to an idol. He does everything right. Like I always say, if you find an idol, you find a clue, you keep it to yourself. You never ever tell anybody. I don't care. It's not worth it unless you get caught out like he has been caught out this week. And he has to let Geordie in on the secret at the end of it. I know some people commented on my takeaways that it was a big mistake. He should have just kept lying to Geordie. I think Geordie would have been more suspicious because Mark is a capable guy. There's no way if I'm Geordie, I'm out there thinking Mark would have struggled for 3-4 days, not find the clue and not find the idol, or have the clue and not find the idol. What did you think of Mark's performance this week, and specifically finding the idol, Geordie being aware of it, and his assessment of Geordie potentially being someone that's not malicious and that he can trust with this information?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a misread on Mark to think that he's so, not very suspicious of Geordie. I think Geordie kind of showed when he was like out for blood with Sandra, like he's here to play. And I think that when he and his brother link up eventually, well, if they link up eventually, that they're going to be playing really hard. And I think that Mark, the mistake was made when he found the clue and Geordie was looking right at him. Since that moment, Geordie was like, ding, 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 Mark, in his head, like it is never going to go away. He was always going to be suspicious that Mark could possibly have an idol. And so when he confronted him and said, oh, you found the clue, you're right. It would have been suspicious if he would have just kept lying and saying, oh yeah, I haven't found it yet. Like, come on. He's played the game before. He's probably knows where the spots are. He's probably found it. So I think he was just stuck in a really hard place. But I think his reasoning for telling Geordie was a misread, for thinking that, oh yeah, I can trust him because Geordie is definitely out there for blood.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things for me, Wayne. I'll definitely get you to weigh in on that whole situation because it was one of the more interesting storylines that happened this week between Geordie and Mark. One of the things for me that was quite interesting as well is that we see in that tribe that Geordie at one point, I believe maybe last week, spoke about Mel being close to Mark, and at one point they need to take care of that. So Mel ultimately getting some votes this week because she's close to Mark, and Mark not really being able to protect her, and maybe being closer to that boys alliance within that group and feeling that there's safety in numbers and why rattle the boat here. It may have worked out in Mark's favor that Mel actually stayed in this game. I don't know if Mel's going to hold this against him, that he couldn't save her. But I think that it's quite interesting that, Geordie did see Mark as a bit of a target beforehand due to his association with Mel, or Mel therefore is a target. And then also in this specific week, he continues on by getting close to Mark, finding out information about the idol, and then he says, this is the information that I can use to take Mark out. Because up until this point, I thought Mark played a flawless game. He's maybe a little bit too obvious in the challenges as a threat because he's always at the forefront, always leading, being good at basketball when in his real life he's not. And Sam says, hey, normally you're terrible at this. What happened out here? He's not underplaying his threat level when it comes to those challenges. But I think that there are some chinks in the armor potentially for Mark. But, a really great winner should get some adversity. For Haley, it was getting voted out, having to go and fight a way back in the game. This could be the adversity that Mark faces, for instance, this season. Like, will he be able to pick up that Geordie is coming for him?
Yeah, I think it is really interesting kind of like observing all of those conversations. And, I think I tend to agree, Jake, that just he was caught between a rock and a hard place. There's no way he could keep that hidden. It would be way more suspicious than put a huge target on his back that, someone thinks he has an idol, probably will lie and tell everyone he has an idol, and he can't really, how long can you hold that lie? So I do think that there wasn't really much of a choice. I think the reasoning behind it, at the end of the day, I think, it's a bit of a misread, but also I think there's a little bit of an element of what else are you going to do except try and trust, and kind of because you're caught there, you don't have another choice. So you kind of do convince yourself it's going to be fine. He's an all right bloke, because you have to justify it. You don't have anything else to do, and you just hope for the best at that particular stage. So I think, there's only so much that can be done, and you focus on the things you can control. And I think he's doing that really, really well. I do think, it's interesting kind of how he's been seen as a threat, his relationship with Mel and his closeness with Mel, but then he doesn't save her. I do think there are tiers of alliances and tiers of kind of closest. And I think it's the same thing as I kind of observed with Benny and Croc. Like, there are those that you will say sacrifice a secret idol for because you know that you can get through them and you need them in the game. What's interesting, I think, here is because you also have your loved one to work with, you will never have that sort of, I guess, like the Whaley alliance, where Haley and I knew that we had to stick together. If we didn't fully trust each other, you can't do it by yourself. Yes, eventually you have to turn on someone, but you can't do it by yourself. Naturally here, and especially for Mark and Jordy, but Mark in particular here, he knows Sam's on the other side. He just has to make it there, and then they have a strong pair. So that, I think, weighs up a little bit as well. Like, are you going to sacrifice your idol now and save someone, or kind of reveal that information to build a stronger bond, or are you going to keep it for your loved one so that you both make it and you have it for both of you? So I think that dynamic is really going to these players are thinking about that a little bit, especially when they still have loved ones on the other side that they want to connect with, or Croc have working with Chrissy as well. So there's a different layer of how much do you actually, where's your tier one? Who's your buddy that you will sacrifice everything for? And where are your kind of little acquaintances, I guess. It's like our diehards, the ride or dies, and our acquaintances there.
That makes 100% sense. And we've got Snuffed, friend of the podcast here. I laughed a little when Mark said Jordy is not a super malicious player, who was one of the main players lobbying to get rid of Sandra. And one of the things I think is quite interesting is that we do know that Sam is really close with Jessie. Jessie is her right-hand person on that side. And then you've got Mark, who the biggest fear I have for Mark is I don't know who's his number two. And for the longest period of time, I thought that his number two was Nina. And then we found out, no, Nina was closer to Josh in the game. Then we found out it might be Mel, but then Mel was targeted here and ultimately betrayed. And also KJ is very close to him. And I found it really interesting when KJ spoke about how special Mark is to her. And you just got this glance from Sam from the other side. Hey, that's my man. Obviously, probably a little bit of editing magic, I would assume, but still funny to watch as a viewer of the show. KJ could be that person that could get close, but it's interesting because Sam's got this problem with KJ because she took Sophie out. So this game is so complex with so many layers due to all these personal relationships out there that you don't know which way it's going to go. But I think the one thing that may be Mark's saving grace, especially early in the merge phase, is that Jessie and Sam is close. Jessie and Jordy is always going to work together. So will that make Mark and Jordy the ultimate pair that comes over from the other tribe to work closely with Jessie and Sam to form what I think will be the power alliance in the merge? I think those are going to be the four players that are going to work together, and it'll be interesting to see how they move through the game. Is that how you're seeing it at the moment, shaping up as well? I don't know if the edit is kind of pointing us in that direction, but I've noticed that Jordy and Jessie have been getting a bigger edit this week. So that could be so that we have enough familiarity with them as characters and players in the game so that when they meet up with the other two big characters and Mark and Sam in that alliance, that we actually want to shout or root for that alliance.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's what we're being led to believe. And it makes sense, I think, especially the Jessie and Sam alliance there. I think that's incredibly strong. And, we already pointed out that they're basically running that tribe. And I think that's really going to really pull. I think Mark and Jordy obviously already now also have a relationship. I don't think Sam realizes this and Jessie on the other side, but the fact that they have the knowledge of the idol will also solidify that. So they're definitely, I think, the group to watch. It's going to be really interesting when we get to merge, whether the pairs try to stay as pairs and together with other pairs to form bigger groups, or how they will try and bring in some of the little singles kind of still floating around, because they're the minority at the moment. We have more pairs. We have about 4 pairs still, is quite strong, and then a bunch of singles. So it's going to be really interesting how those groups form together. I think the edit is leading us to think that there's that joining and everything. It's going to be interesting because from my experience of playing it, what you think is going to happen on the other side does not happen. I can't remember what the edit happened, but certainly when we got to merge, it did not work the way we thought it would, but that was okay. But there's interesting bits in that as well. And I think, it'll be interesting to see what happens at merge, especially because they've been mixed up and they've lost loved ones and they have vendettas, KJ and Sophie and all that stuff, and how that's going to play out.
Yeah, and I'm sure for you as a player watching your own season back and you're seeing all these storylines emerge and you're like, what, really? That's a main storyline at the merge? I had no idea that was going on. So it's very hard to predict what the editors are actually going to pick and choose when it comes to it. And I think Snuff brings up a really good point here as well. He says that I reckon they're getting a big edit because they'll be targeted as threats. So that's the two brothers. Could Mark cut Geordie to avoid an information leak? And I think that Mark should cut Geordie before Geordie gets an opportunity to make a move on him, because he's got that information. And, if someone knows you've got an idol and you're trying to keep that under wraps, you definitely want to do something about it. And one of the things, before I even go down that train of thought, what really gave me respect for as a player for Geordie this week, and I highly rate his game after this week, the Sandra move was obvious. Like, I mean, I don't give you credit for that. You should take her out. For me, that's not a massive resume builder. If you're going to go to the end and say, hey, I took the queen out, and be like, Sandra had no real chance of winning this season. She had no real social capital. She had to play dead for most of the season. All the respect for her for being able to do that when she's that much more of a capable player, and she played it correct with the hand that she was dealt with her reputation coming into the season. But that was the obvious move. What really impressed me, was Geordie's ability to hang on to that information when he found it, and not to leak the fact that he saw Mark get the clue, not to leak the fact that Mark has got the idol, and the ability for him to wait to use that information at the right time. How difficult is it to do that when you're playing a game such as this, because you've got so much downtime? I'm sure you want the game sometimes to move faster than what it does, and leaking information or talking to people about things like this will help speed the game up. Is it very difficult? And is this the sign of a great player when you can do that? Because in my mind, I'm thinking it must be.
Yeah, I think it's definitely managing information is the only thing you have. Information is power, and managing it is so key. And yes, you have to be managing it correctly. There's a lot of impatience. There's a lot of, eagerness, and depending on how you want to play, it can be a risk. It can be a huge risk. And I think it's very smart of him to be managing that information and carefully watching Mark and kind of buying his time, because there wasn't really much they would do. I mean, until he knows he has the idol, the clue doesn't mean anything, until he has the idol, it's just a clue. If you get voted out with a clue, that doesn't mean anything. So I think it's definitely that confirmation, being patient, even though you're in the elements and it feels like you want to make big moves because there's nothing else to do at the time. It is buying your time. And I think, yeah, that was definitely a smart thing for him to do. I think it will pan out well. Well, any information is powerful for him right now. So he's in a good position right now. It will just be how he interacts with Mark and being aware of, picking up on any cues if Mark goes for him, because he does have this information. But it's definitely put him in a powerful place, definitely.
Now, Jake, one of the things that stood out for me this week, and I spoke about this in my 5 takeaways in one of the episodes, I think it was the last episode actually, where we had that massive endurance challenge come up. I mentioned that if you watch Australian Survivor, you know that in the US Survivor, for instance, the last challenge is always fire making to get into the finale. When it comes to the Australian Survivor, it's always an endurance challenge. So if you're a student of the game, you should be out there watching very closely who are the real threats going into the end game and who does well at endurance. And how big of a target does this now put on Sam, Khan, Geordie, and Shay for doing as well as they did out there? Do you think this is something that is going to increase the threat level on these players as people to take out early? Because if I was out there, I definitely would be targeting them, because I wouldn't want to go up against any of those guys, because I think my endurance would be horrible in any case. I struggle to sit still. I don't know how I would stand still for that long.
Yeah, I would be terrible at endurance as well. I think that for Sam, it doesn't really change much. I think people kind of already viewed her as a bit of a challenge, maybe not a challenge beast, but like good at challenges. And I think endurance specifically, but I think specifically Geordie and Khan, I think it did raise their threat level, because I remember, I think at Tribal, Jonathan asked David who he was surprised by in the challenge. And I believe he said Geordie, because Geordie, he seems like a pretty fit guy, but you wouldn't think like that he was a beast in those endurance type challenges. And so I think it does raise the threat level of him a bit, because people view him as a pretty trustworthy guy, but they're like, oh, but he's a challenge beast. Maybe we need to cut him before the end, even though he is a trustworthy ally. And for Khan, he's already a massive threat in the eyes of everyone. They've been trying to flush his idol for the past, 3 weeks, it seems like. So, I mean, the fact that he has an idol, people view him as a strategic threat, and he's good at endurance, definitely, I think, raised the threat level. It's just giving him even more ammunition to take him out.
And Wei, something really scary happens here, obviously, in this challenge. And, Sam passes out, and Joel here mentions that I think that it was actually a positive thing for Sam, obviously not in the moment, but in hindsight, that she passed out because it might sort of make people think that she's a little bit weaker than what she is. I think it's pretty insane that she held out for as long as she did up until the point where she passed out. Can you talk a little bit about doing challenges out there in the Outback? Because you've got the best experience of what it's like doing an endurance challenge in the conditions that they would have faced out there.
Oh, I'm going to say I was terrible at endurance challenges. Anything that was me holding something up, I was basically, please don't let me be the first person out. For most of them, I wasn't. The second someone else dropped, I'm like, all right, I'm gone. So no, it is so incredibly, incredibly tough. It is such a testament to her that she pushed herself to that limit. It goes to show how passionate and how committed to the game she is, which, I don't think any of us ever doubted, but certainly to this particular aspect of it, how committed she is to challenges is, it's known. She's known as a really strong player physically, but I think it just shows that extra level. I think it's definitely tough. I think these particular conditions are misleading because they have the extra level of the humidity. We had the Outback and everyone was very conscious of the heat. I think they're conscious of the heat as well, but you don't realize how much of you loses. It's just the dehydration part and how much that is and how much that tests your body. So it's terrifying that she went through that. Really great that she's okay. Best medic team. Everyone is always looking out for your health paramount, but it's tough. It's definitely tough. And yeah, they were my least favorite part.
Yeah, sure. It was so scary to watch. And I'm so happy she got back because I would have been devastated if we lost a second strong female player to a challenge this week. Would have been really, really bad to see. And obviously we've had some scary moments in the US as well. I can think of Caleb, who was the Big Brother player who went to go play. And what was the season? Was it Ko Rong that he ended up getting medevaced and he passed out and they couldn't get his body temperature back down? So these kind of things do happen in Survivor, and we never want to see it. We don't want to see anybody get pulled from the game in such a manner. The other thing that really stood out to me here as an interesting part of the gameway was that there were negotiations happening between an idol being passed from one person to another, and I felt like JLP kind of held Khan ransom to that deal, even though Sam never really agreed to the terms.
Yeah, I thought that was definitely an extra layer to it. Certainly Khan, I think, he didn't have to, he did. He wants to prove himself as a trustworthy person. I think that's more testament to who he is as a person, as an individual. I think it's just very, very authentic. During those endurance challenges, one of the things that does happen is that you chat and banter and have those types of conversations, because otherwise you're just focused on the pain, anything to take your mind off the pain. So those types of deals are not unusual. I think for our season, we definitely had, people making it tougher and, wanting to shorten it and making those types of deals. So yeah, so the fact that there was that those chats wasn't really surprising in those situations. I think it does. I don't think Khan absolutely had to give over the necklace. I don't think anyone would have held it against him if he didn't. But I think as an individual, he wouldn't have been able. That's just not the person he is. And he I think that he wanted to be. He's the kind of person who wants to hold himself to his word, and people see that, and that ups your, you might be seen as a challenge beast, but then you have that extra social capital because people just genuinely like you. So that actually really does help your game in some way. So, and it's authentic. I think the fact that it's authentic, especially.
Yeah. I mean, Khan, it's so tough between him and Chrissy. I can't say who's my favorite because sometimes I feel like Khan's my favorite, then I'm like, Chrissy's my favorite, and then it's like, it's Khan. And in this episode, the moment between them and a tribal council and Khan getting a bit emotional about, the fact that he feels like in his real life, he sometimes struggles to make these deep connections. And in Survivor, he finds it so interesting. For me, it really hit hard. And to see him get emotional out there, I've liked him because of his playful deviousness that he brings to the camera and, saying, I'm going to backstab. And he made this move on Brianna. And I was like, yes, we need like a devious, fun villain, like it's always fun to watch a devious fun villain on camera. But then I think this game is softening him up way, and I'm really, really worried for him because it looks like he's getting a bit emotionally invested in the players around him, and maybe there's going to be too much trust with him not having to play as idol for so long. He's relied on a lot of people to keep him safe in the game, and I think that I think there's some, since the next on Survivor sort of section happened in the last episode, there's been a promo and more has been revealed about Mark wanting to target Khan and Khan being close to Sam. I'm really fearful for him, but looking at these relationships, how difficult is it to differentiate between game and personal relationships? And you might like someone really out there, but it's not smart to move with them. And I think that there was interesting things that happened even with yourself and George at times, where George saved you early in the game, and then you felt indebted to him, and then at some point you thought, this is not the best thing for my game to be associated with him. I have to put my feelings aside. How difficult is it in a game such as this, where you, like you mentioned, you only have each other out there?
Yeah, it is a really, really different situation. It's not something you ever have to think about in your real life, but you have to think about here. And it is that you will make decisions that are against your genuine core value in being. And just because that's the game. I do think that ultimately most players, and I do feel that in our season, they recognize that separation and it's not personal. And, that's the first thing that happens when you come back from tribal. Hey, it's not personal. And it generally never is. It's just that somebody has to go. You have to make a vote, you make a move, and that's it. And you move on. So I think, but it is tough. And I do think because the extra added element of you're in these harsh conditions and you have nothing but, human connection. It's one of our core values that we need, like I think it's food, water, shelter, and human connection. I don't think we can be very isolated. The only thing you have to rely on is those human connections. It can be a little bit misleading. It does take, I think, a little bit of work to strategically work that out and be like, I have to separate my emotional connection from this and think strategically what's best for my game. And sometimes you don't. A lot of people don't do that and go very, very far. I think that I probably was someone who kind of was like not always thinking about what's going to get me to the very, very, very end. I'm like, okay, what's going to get me to the next day, and kind of playing that way. And different people play different games. I'm with you. I'm terrified for Khan right now. I know the promo probably was part of it, but I do think he has it in him to be strategic. I think having the safety of the idol might keep him a little bit safer for a little while, as long as he doesn't get blindsided by it. That's the key. But he does seem to be one of those people who kind of gets a little paranoid and is like, I think I'm getting targeted, I'm going to play it. So as long as he listens to those instincts, maybe he'll come back and be okay, and then come back with a little, once he loses that idol, if it gets flushed, he might recalibrate that. But I'm terrified for him right now.
I couldn't play the game like him. Like, I would have played that idol 2 or 3 tribal councils ago already. Like, the I can't say it on camera, the size of what he has to be able to do what he does out there and not play the idol, absolutely baffles the mind. As a fan of the show, I would always think it's me if somebody else knows that I've got an idol. And Marcus here says that I think Khan's edit is being set up for a big downfall. Maybe he gets voted out with an idol. It's kind of what I think as well. And Julia says, as a character, Khan reminds me a bit of Jericho. And it's an interesting observation. I haven't thought of that before. I'm a big Cookie Monster fan myself, Jericho. And I do think that Jericho had a similar game in some ways. And, Jericho's edit was an interesting one as well, Jake, because I don't know if you remember that far back to Jericho's original season, but he kind of appeared and disappeared and appeared at times as well. So Khan could actually replicate a Jericho winner's edit at this stage. It's not that far-fetched.
Yeah, I think the big difference is obviously the idol is putting such a big target on Khan, and I don't think anyone was really thinking of Jericho as a huge threat at this point. And obviously he was very villainous from what we saw, but no one else was really seeing that. And I don't think anyone is really thinking of Khan as much of a villain. In fact, I think it's more the opposite. And so there are some similarities, but there's also, I think, some pretty big differences, mainly being that like Khan is just painted as a huge target in everyone's mind. And I think Jericho was able to definitely lay low in the pre-merge.
Now, Wei, very interesting here. We get a fire challenge. Now, you guys obviously had a fire challenge in your season as well. I love the fire challenge as long as it's not before the final tribal council. Not a big fan of that twist, but bring it in earlier in the seasons. I like that we bring, some survival elements to the game of Survivor, and you have to be good at making a fire. Is this something while you're out there that comes up on as a conversation at all with your tribe mates, where you think you potentially could be pulled into a fire making challenge? Was that conversation happening in your season? And did you like seeing this fire challenge, and specifically the underdog and Mel beating the big alpha male Ben out there in a fire making challenge? I don't think anybody saw it coming.
I absolutely loved how that fire making challenge came out, which was fantastic. In terms of going out there, yeah, you do wonder whether you're going to get a fire challenge. I don't think we ever thought it was going to come or like kind of mid when it did. I think we kind of had discussions. It was more like if you go to rocks or if you go, and all those things, those situations where you have to do fire that we're more considering. I think it was that introduction of, hey, we're going to have a mid, a fire challenge to determine who goes home and stuff like that. And you had that that face off between Danny, Emmett, and Andrew in my season, which was quite interesting. I loved it this way. I was looking at the rope specifically that they set up for this, and it looked thicker than the one that we had for our season. I'm like, they've learned, because of course Danny had that amazing strategy to make it all kind of go up. They've got a thicker rope, so you have to build the fire. But I do think it does add that survival element. It's interesting because for our season, we never really had. We ended up with a flint, but our initial fires were all made without flints, just because it was so dry. It was much easier to do. So while we practiced a little bit with flint and everything like that, at the end of the day, we just kind of kept regenerating our fire just because it was completely dry. We'd never had the rain that they've had here. So you get less of that practice element. And I think because of that, you do kind of wonder what it's going to be like. And, we didn't have any coconut husk where we were. So to work with that as an extra thing we would have to think about, and not having had it or played with it or done stuff. So there it's always in your mind and stuff, but I think it's definitely a great challenge. It's exciting to watch. And I think it was definitely one of the highlights of challenges this season for sure.
It was so close. I was so impressed by Mel's skills. I didn't know she had it in her. It was really cool to see Michelle get really into it as well, and shouting his sister on, trying to give advice, and her saying like, "I'm doing it. These are the thinnest sticks that I can get to get the fire started." And I mean, it's the content we've all been wanting from Michelle and Mel that we haven't been seeing the whole season. So it was so great to see that. And then the one thing that kept sticking in my mind is either the Australians are that much better at making a fire than the American survivors, or it's because they get a lot more drier supplies to work with. And if you're out on the island, probably the humidity has a big role to play in how easy it is to actually get a fire started. Because I think it took Tony and Sarah Lucina a long time to get their fire started in Winners at Wars. So it's interesting to see how the different locations can actually play into how easy it is to actually get a fire started. We also got in this here, Snuff saying that love Benny as a character, but I was over the moon with Mel winning. Hopefully it is the spark needed for her to get some confessionals. And, I felt like this was the time for Benny to go, Jake, because I didn't know what else he had to give us come merge time. Like, do you think there was much that Ben could have done from here? And maybe just go on an immunity run, but that's pretty much as much. Like, it didn't look like he had the strategic chops for what was required in the rest of the season.
Yeah, I don't know. It might have been a bit interesting to see him make it a little bit farther and maybe team up with Shay. They maybe could have made something happen, but I generally agree that he didn't really have much of the strategic mind to make any big noise.
Yeah, I think he would have struggled going forward. So I was happy to see this play out. And then Marcus saying best fire making challenge since Becky versus Sandra, which is quite a while ago. So I can't even remember how that fire making challenge played out, Jake. Was it a really quick one? Or that one was the one that Becky kept going for ages, right? That was the one where they
had to give them matches because they broke the flint, and then they gave them replacement flints, and then they overused that flint. And so Jeff was over it. He was like, okay, we're going to matches. Just get it over with. And everyone on the jury is just like yawning. They're just like, oh, just get this over with. Oh my gosh. I mean, that was like kind of pathetic, honestly. Like you're out there like on a show called Survivor and you can't even make a fire without a match. I mean,
Last thing I wanted to explore before we sort of start getting towards the end of the podcast is we've got two very different dynamics in the tribes with, the one tribe having the nucleus of Jesse and Sam sort of running that tribe, and they've had Croc and Chrissy as a potential add-on. They've had Khan working with them, and they've also had Benny working with them at certain points, and Michelle. So they're pretty much the nucleus at this point. And then the other tribe is being run by Alphas, and I've seen a lot of there's, I use this word carefully, hate or people not being very happy about the Alpha Alliance running this tribe. But wait, I feel like it's quite refreshing seeing an Alpha Alliance because men don't do well in Australian Survivor. How has it been for you watching men finally getting it together and getting an alliance going?
Overrated. Look, I think it's a smart thing to do at this particular stage. This is when they can kind of band together, just the way the numbers work, etc. But I think it'll be interesting because this only gets you so far. I think the huge thing to call out is, of course, once you get to merge, the second you're not immune and you're competing against each other, what does that look like? So if they're in a dangerous situation, I think Sandra was the one. The weak will always outnumber the strong and take them out. So while they've kind of gone against their strategy for now, it's only going to last so long. So look, some interesting dynamics, bit boring in my opinion. Every time everyone wants like, come on, girls, you can do something, but just they don't have the numbers and they're sticking strong. And that's understandable at this stage because they need each other to take each other out. But yeah, it's going to be interesting come merge, how that looks, etc.
Who's your top players to look out for going into the merge? I'm assuming Mark, Sam, Jesse, and Geordie are all there. If we look outside of the obvious four players, who are the players you think that can make the biggest splash going into the merge section here of the game?
Yeah, I'm really curious about some of like the single players and what they're going to do because you obviously had like Juicy Dave, like early on in the season, kind of trying to do something. And now he's kind of laid low and made some really good alliances. I think he has a lot in him. I'm curious how to see him play again because we know he can play. It's just that he might have kind of made some missteps and had to play as idol. But the fact that he did that and then managed to skate by and have basically not be a threat and not be a target for so long, there's something in there that I'm curious how he's going to go. And yeah, as personal bias, I definitely want to see Khan do well. Look, he has a really strong edit. I do think he has the social capital. I do think he's reading his alliances correctly, which is how he's managed to hang on to that idol for so long. So as long as he keeps that read on, that's great. But yeah, he is a huge target. So it's a really, really big thing to maneuver. But if he can and just survive and not get blindsided, I think he'll go really far.
It's interesting you mentioned that because, last season I kept saying, surely George can't make it to the merge. Surely George can't make it deep and past the merge. I kept doubting him and I loved him as a character. And I was like, I love George, but how's he going to get there? There's just no way. And he kept finding a way. So, Khan's still in there. He's had this idol for so long. Nobody's taken him out. Everybody has told us how much of a strategical threat he is in the game, even though they haven't taken him out. Do we see that play out in the merge? And I think he's a capable player. I'm hoping for it. I'm going to be honest. I love Khan. So to see him do really well. And then Chrissy, Jake, is the other player that I'm really interested to see what Chrissy's game is going to be moving forward. Do you think Chrissy has got some legs in the game? And she's one of those singles that Wei spoke about. What is the best direction for her or the route here? Because she has correctly identified that, yes, I'm taking revenge against Benny, but Jesse and Sam was a part of that plan. So she is aware of that, which gives me some hope.
Yeah, I really like Chrissy as well. She came into the game not really knowing anything, and I think she's done quite well in that regard. I mean, she's made it this far, and now she's out without her partner, and I hope that she can kind of keep the will in the game. We saw her, maybe it was kind of not as important as I'm making it out to be, but she made a comment to Croc that was like, oh, I can't keep playing at, like now that you're gone. So I just hope that she doesn't lose any steam in that and that she can find, the will to keep playing. But if she does, I think she could do great. I mean, I think she's got a really great social game. And I think that, taking out maybe for Ben, but everyone else, it wasn't against Chrissy at all when they took out Croc. It was merely just the fact that he was going after Jesse and Jesse was in the power position. So I definitely agree that Chrissy has some legs going forward, and it's going to be interesting to see how now she's a single, and the main people we're talking about as power players going to the merge, their pairs with Jordy, Jesse, Mark, and Sam. I hope that she can make something happen. Hopefully the pairs don't try to take out the singles.
And KJ is the other one that I'm very interested in. She's been getting an on and off edit. I feel like she's got some legs in her game as well. It just depends on if Sam can forgive and forget what happened before, and she doesn't automatically hold KJ or sees KJ as a threat due to the fact that she took Sophie out. Because any logical sibling will normally want to take revenge if something like that happened. And I think Sam is thinking that KJ still has her claws out for her, but I don't think KJ does. I think KJ's actually moved on from it. So it's going to be very interesting how it plays out, but I always notice the edit. And when Sam gave that little look to KJ, when KJ said that Mark is very special to her in the game, it kind of showed me Sam is still not cool with KJ, and she's going to try and take a stab at KJ as soon as she can in the merge portion of the game. So I'm a bit worried for KJ and how that's going to work out after the merge, but I think that there's some exciting storylines ahead. I'm hoping we don't get a very obvious, pairing that sort of teams up against the rest and just take them out one by one, because that could be very boring to see. I'm hoping that we get an exciting merge section of the game, similar to your season, Way. Like, it was so chaotic at times that we never knew what was going to happen and who was going to get to the end, because the power kept swinging back and forth. So I'm hoping for something like that moving forward. Jake, this week I think we'll do our top 5 separately. I'll talk to you off air about that, just because otherwise it'll drag for quite a bit, because we normally give in-depth explanations as to why we think this player's 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, or 1st. So we'll do a separate video of that, and I'll get your top 5 from you off air so I can put that out there. But Way, it's been so great talking to you here about this season of Australian Survivor. What else are you working on currently? I know that you're an author, you're writing some books. Is there anything great and exciting on the way? And are you using some of that inspiration that we spoke about from your own season to write any of your future books?
Yeah, no, it has been wonderful to kind of go back to real life and everything like that. And yeah, I'm really I'm very inspired by everything that happened. But it takes time, and it takes time to write books. I do have a picture book coming out, not this year, but next year. Picture books take a very long time to make because we have to find an illustrator and everything like that. But it is specifically inspired by Survivor. It's called Last Place Lynn. So it's about a little girl who goes through sporting events and comes last place all the time. Not that I relate to that in any way, shape, or form. But it is absolutely inspired by my wonderful tribe mates and that experience out there of sometimes just owning that and recognizing that and being proud of that. So I'm really grateful that I could write that and that it's been accepted. And yeah, so watch out for it in 2023 for sure.
So Last Place Lynn coming out in 2023. Would you say 2023? It's coming out?
So next year. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Next year. Okay. And it's a picture read book. Is it for kids?
Yes.
And what ages normally?
Yeah, so it'll be a picture book. So for little kids, like, kind of basically any kid under 7, even adults, I think will appreciate it, because it'll be, an inspiring story. I'm sure many of us relate to the idea of being picked last for school sport and what that feels like. So, yeah. So
when this comes out, please let me know. I want to buy 5 of those books, and I'm going to make it available to listeners of this podcast when we hit 750 subscribers, because we've already got the 500 subscriber mark.
Oh, you'll have 10,000 by then. I know that, Chris.
Okay, we'll put something out there. All I'm telling you is, as soon as the book's available, we'll be talking in the meantime in any case, but I'm definitely buying 5 of them. I'm making it available to people who are listening to this podcast. We'll put some competition around it, and we'll get you back to talk about the book as well, because I'm really interested. Survivor related. So we'll talk about it.
Absolutely. Everything Survivor related. No, absolutely. I'd be delighted to. And I'm so thrilled to have been a part of this. And thank you so much again for inviting me to be the first returning guest and returning player to do the deep dive. It's been really enjoyable.
This has been so much fun. Jake, I'm sure you had some fun there as well. What is it over there now? Just after 2?
2:11 a.m. at the moment.
Dedication, guys. This is the kind of dedication you need when you're doing a podcast such as this. For everybody in the live who have commented tonight and asked questions, we appreciate you so much. For those that are listening to this at a later stage, thank you for listening and being a real one for listening an hour and 8 minutes into it. Please be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so already. I hope I earned that subscription today. And also put a like on the video and comment. We love comments over here. It does help with the YouTube algorithm as well. And like I said, watch out for that top 5 video. It'll drop over the weekend, most likely on Saturday. And we will see you guys next time. Thanks and talk soon.